using the Metronic theme. So basically, first thing we're going to do is open the documentation and create a working directory that we can practice in. So first thing I do is I find a working directory. So in this case, I've created one on my desktop. I've created it here under this test directory, Aaron, Flot charts, and then I'm doing this one under screencast, so you can see it's an empty directory at the moment. I've got to get our basic theme in there, our template that I can use, so that I have the framework from the Keen themes to give it some styling and give me the JavaScript libraries that I need to make this work. I also need to pull up the documentation. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to open a second Finder window just to make this a little bit separate and clearer. So in here I come to where I downloaded the theme originally. Again, here's the theme force, which is the directory I downloaded it into. I unzipped it, and it unzipped into this folder. And then I basically am going to come over here and go into the directory for the one with Bootstrap 3, admin, and then we're actually going to go into the template content, and here's where we have everything that we need. So there's the assets, and then here's also the charts HTML, but in this case I just want that real basic empty one that we looked at last time. So that one is going to be the layout. Let's see, where is it? You're probably already seeing it. Blank page. So I want that, and I want the assets. So I've got those two selected. I'm going to copy those two items, and I'm going to drop them into my screencast folder here. And boom. It's a lot of stuff, but there it is. Now, I can open that, and I can also open the documentation. So let's get the documentation here. Go into this documentation directory, find the index, drag it over here. To Firefox. I'm using Firefox. You can use whatever you want. Okay, now what? The next thing is that you're going to scroll down and you want to look at the documentation for Flot charts. So we click on this submenu, Table of Contents, JavaScript Plugins and Resources. And here we are, and I'm going to go and minimize that. And basically what we want to do is we want to take just the Flot charts example, since that's what we're looking at, and we're looking for jQuery Flot charts. And let's see if I can find it. There it is, jQuery Flot charts. Click that, and it tells you right away there's no specific CSS files for it. There are some JavaScript files that are required for it. Here's a demo page of it working, which we'll bring up. And then here is the official documentation page, which I'm also going to bring up. And I'm holding down Command when I click to bring up that link in a separate tab. Okay, so here's the Metronic charts page. Now none of these look quite the same as what we were working with. We want it to actually be a little bit more like the dashboard we saw, but this gives you an idea of what the Flot charts are like. Here's the dashboard, and this is the one that we're working with. There's actually two aspects to what you're seeing here. First of all, this is in this box again. And also you'll notice that when I hover over a column, these green columns, we're getting a pop-up. And we're using JavaScript to create these charts, and these charts have, they use JavaScript events, so when the mouse is over a data column, it triggers that pop-up. And this pop-up is another part of what's offered by Twitter Bootstrap, excuse me, the styling library. So in this case, we've already got it loaded because this dashboard uses that library, and that's why we copied the entire assets folder so we can leverage all of the different JavaScript resources. But basically what we see here is this pop-up is a separate item. It's actually using a tooltip widget from the Bootstrap library. So when you first create this chart, that's not something that's built in. You have to add that functionality. So the first step for us is just to get the chart to show up at all. Now, one of the things that is required to get these charts to work at all is you have to give it dimensions. If you go to the Flot chart actual page here, and you go to the documentation. So I click the documentation link. Remember, I got here to this documentation page back here on our original documentation that I dragged over from the documentation folder here. So documentation index, drag that over. We went to table of contents number 11, selected jQuery Flot charts, and then I clicked official documentation to bring up that. Now, when you click the documentation, it actually takes you to GitHub, which is a common place where people store their code. And this is a README that uses a certain type of markup called Markdown that makes it display like this within GitHub. It knows how to interpret it, makes it look real nice and readable. So it basically is a good place for people to post their open source libraries and their code so that you can get to work, see how it works, and get some information from the developer. So basically, it tells you this first thing that you have to do to get this thing working. Now these are sort of variables, okay, and these store the stuff that you have to pass to this opening method. A method is like a function. You can think of it that it's very similar to where you pass it parameters and then it operates on them. So in this case, this is the jQuery symbol because FlotChart is a jQuery plugin. It's leveraging this new method that was added via the FlotChart library plugin, which is a plugin for jQuery. So in this case, it's the plot. It's called the plot method, and you have to pass it 3 different parameters. And so these are what they are. And then this whole thing goes through and describes what each of these contains. Here's another way to call it. This is jQuery selector, and it's selecting an element in the DOM on your page. So in this case, the hashtag indicates that this element is going to be identified as an ID. So an example would be like this. Let's go ahead and open up our code that I copied over. So the layout blank page. Skip through into the body. So these div elements, you can see they have classes, and I bet you there are no IDs in this default. Oh, there's one. Okay. So IDs, this is an ID, and you can only have an ID has a value. So you can see this is just a little education about HTML, backtracking for a second. These are HTML elements, and within an element is defined as this less than sign and then closing with this greater than sign, and then you have to have the closing tag. So in a tag you have the less than sign closes with greater than sign. Inside there, spaced out, you have different attributes. These are called attributes. It's basically just like XML. I'm not expecting you to know XML, I'm just saying that it happens to be the same, and there's a whole story behind that, but we're not going to go into it. Essentially, class is an attribute, and you can have class in any of these, and you assign classes, and as we showed before when we were working, classes can be separated by a space, like this. So that would be, now this particular li, which is a list item in an unordered list, this element would have the class drop down and new class, which is different than if I did this. That would actually edit the class and probably break something because I've now changed the name of that class. So I'm going to get rid of that. Now, why would you ever have an ID or a class? There's a whole theory around this, but classes are generally used when you can apply that same class to multiple elements. You'll see that a lot of times you'll see similar classes to different elements, and that helps you to target just certain types of elements so that you can apply styling to those elements, but sort of as groups. Whereas an ID is applied to only one element, period. That's it. One element at all on the page. So you cannot and should not have duplicate IDs ever. So you can see here that they're using an underscore. You can't use spaces in IDs. So basically, this is one ID. So you would call this, or you would identify this list item in jQuery you could reference this ID. Now, in jQuery you can pull things by classes, and there's different ways to select, many different ways, but the easiest and quickest is by an ID. So when we go back to their example, you can see here that they are calling the element, they are selecting the one, I'm saying calling, but selecting is the correct term, using hashtag placeholder, which means that somewhere in this code for the page there is an element that has an ID of placeholder. That's how you identify it. So this right here returns a jQuery object, and that jQuery object is this element in the document object model. So if it was a div with the ID placeholder, this would return that div that could then be operated on. And jQuery adds some stuff to it. So that's what this does. That allows us to do some neat stuff. So in this case, because we have the Flot library installed, it's added the plot method. And in this case, now that we have this jQuery object, plot method is added to it automatically. So you just add this period and then the method name, plot, and then you pass it the information you need to make it do its work. And this is just another way of doing what they're talking about. So jQuery has this idea called chainability, and basically what it means is once you have a jQuery object, you can call multiple methods separating by periods, and that allows you to do it all in one row. It makes it a quicker call. It simplifies things. That's really it. So all it's saying is that this element, after you run this method, this plot method, on this jQuery object, then you can call this data method and pass it this name, and it will do some stuff. So again, not going to dive too deep. Okay, so like I said, we have to pass it the placeholder. So I know it's a little confusing because this looks different from this one. We've been talking about this one, but we'll come back to that. Basically, this is the simplified method here. So there's a placeholder, which is a jQuery object, and there's a data, and there's some options. So the data they're talking about is down here. So we've already gone through how to select a placeholder. This is how you select a placeholder, and that's what you would pass here. So literally, this part right here is what you will pass to this thing up here as placeholder. Data, okay. Data is an array. It's a data series. So, and it can be either raw data or an object with properties. So in this case, this is an array of an array. So this is an array within an array. So you have an x and a y coordinate, basically. And here's the example. So basically there's some more data, and then here are the options, which is an object, which an object opens with curly braces and closes. This is just pseudocode, so it's not well formed. You couldn't just copy and paste that. It wouldn't work. You can also provide a label, which is useful if you want to have a label on your axes. And here are some plot options, and this is basically how you get a graph going, so it tells you. And here's the legend, which is one of the options, and a label. Now this one's a little bit more complicated because it actually, the label parameter actually takes a function. This is an anonymous function. It's anonymous because there's no name to it. Anyway, you can tell it's function because it says it's function here, and then you pass it these two variables, and then you format and return what you want that label formatter to output. That's a little complicated. We're gonna skip that for now, but we'll have to come back to it eventually to make all this stuff work. So this is all the detail on the various options that Flotchart can use. Now at this point you're probably brain's zoning out a little bit and you're probably a little overwhelmed, so we're going to tie this in and make a very real example on how to do this. So what do we do? How do we start? First thing is we need to have a portlet. So just like we had done previously, we want to add a very basic portlet. So we're going to use this guy. So what we do here is scroll down, and we're going to find the area where we're supposed to begin coding in this example. So there's the sidebar, style customizer, don't care about that. End footer, end page content, end page content, blank page content goes here. Boom. So this is where we're going to start editing out of all that code. I'm going to say this file is a different name. I'm just going to call it index. And I'm going to save it in here. There it is. Okay. Now that we got this, we can start working. So, again, how do we make this thing? So, basically, I have this row here. So I'm going to want a div of class row. Usually, that's handled for me. Let's see if they've done that here. Yep, row, and they've made it a full width column. So I could create another row and another column if I wanted, just to make it smaller. So in that case, I guess I will. I'll just copy this. So I'm going to go copy HTML, come over here, and paste. Boom. And let's see here, there's portlet body. And you can see that this lines up with this guy. You can see the little tick marks underneath this div. So when I click on it, those line up with this one. So you can see the little white dots under there that are underlining. So that means that that lines up with that. So let's go ahead and fix my alignment here. Get everything tabbed in correctly. Okay, now I've got a portlet. Let's see if that worked. Drag this guy onto the screen, onto a new tab, and voila. Here's my portlet. Now it's a little small. I want to make that a little wider. So I'm actually going to widen that out, and we can adjust that. Remember, it's a grid, so I can go all the way up to 12. So I'm going to do 6. I'm going to use half. How nice. Okay, so there it is, which is, you know, pretty similar to what we're seeing back here. Oops. On the dashboard of our example, right? As soon as it decides to load, it's about half of this width. Maybe it's a little less, so let's do 4 to make it a little bit more realistic. Okay, and here's another little helper thing from Bootstrap. You can actually go like that, pull right. Notice I added a class with a space. The class name is pull right. This is one class. It just hyphen is valid in a class name. And let's see if that works. Yep, pulls it over to the right. So there it is. But in this case, I don't want to do it. I just want to show you I could get this thing over to the right. Anyway, we're going to go like this. I'm actually going to blow this up to 6 to make this a little easier to see. So, okay. There it is. Now, I'm going to get rid of this blank page content. Goes here as well. I don't need that notice anymore. In Sublime Text 2, you can use Command X to eliminate either what you've highlighted or the entire row, which is what I've done. So here, if I've got, I'll back up, Command Z. So I've got this. If I put the cursor anywhere on that row, or I highlight that row and the one below it and go Command X, it goes away. And if I hit Command X again, row goes away. In this case, I want that row, blank row, just to give me a lot of padding. So I've done that. Now, chart. We're going to add the chart basically into this body here. So how do we do that? Okay, first things first. Got to have a very basic chart, right? So we need a placeholder for it. Now you can see there's already a class here, but we actually need an ID. So I'm going to do an ID attribute. ID equals, call it placeholder. So got a new ID on this called placeholder. Probably ought to make sure that's not used anywhere else in this file, so I've copied it. I'm going to go Command F. I'm going to search for it. Looks like there are 2 matches. There it is, but that's its own attribute. It's not an ID, so it looks safe to use. So there it is. Now I'm going to get rid of this stuff. And I'm just going to say this is where my Flot chart will go. Great. And we can come back over here and check out our handiwork. Perfect. Okay. So we're at line 1000. And we're going to come down here. Oh, look, jQuery app init. So why did I come down here? Well, we need to add some JavaScript. And the way that this theme works is it wraps everything up really nice for you. In fact, if you come back to the documentation and we go to the top, it'll actually tell you here coding and extending. So that's 10 in the table of contents on the documentation for the Metronic theme. So we're going to go down here and look at what that means. It actually says that for coding and extending, you're going to use JavaScript, and you're actually going to override or extend the theme functions. You can use this. And then it says, please keep your own code separate as much as possible to make future updates straightforward. Okay, great. So, what does that mean? We're going to open, I actually don't need this at the moment. I'm going to get rid of that. If we go back over here to assets, when you go into scripts, you will notice there is a custom JS, and that follows the path that they just told us about. Assets, scripts, custom JS. So there it is. And that's how we extend. Now, I think I saw something earlier that talked about a little bit different, JavaScript initialization. So that's actually item 9. And so it says, actually, and remember that app thing we talked about? Well, that was this part, app.init, which is calling a method, because it's got a period, off of this app object, JavaScript. So we're inside of a script tag here at the bottom. Well, what does that mean? What is all that? Well, here you can see they're defining it, var app. And I bet you in here somewhere is init. So what this thing does is it creates this variable, which is actually just an anonymous function that has all this stuff in it right here. And the main thing it has is that it returns this object. And one of the items in the object is init. And that's it. So what this tells us is core JavaScript initialization is implemented here through the app object shown below. This approach enables an easy modular implementation to initialize jQuery plugins and other application logics. Cool. Okay. So we could use that. Now in this case we're doing chart work, that kind of stuff, so I think in this case our best option is to use this custom CSS file. So we'll actually use that. I just wanted you to be aware of this app init as well. Now let's go ahead and open up custom. Okay. And you'll see that it is pretty much blank. It's calling, just like the other one, it's calling this custom on the page, and it's got this initializing here, and then do some helper functions. And it's just showing you my func is this example function that's calling. So these are all public functions. So in this case we could actually create our own stuff, or we could actually initialize our own function. This is where it gets a little confusing because of this wrapping, but it's okay. We're going to get through this. I'll walk you through this part and how to set up your Flot chart. So once you've gotten over this, like sort of shock about how confusing this is, then we can start to add it. But the first thing was just to identify the different components, where things go to make things work. So really you can see that in our file, we're going to find that placeholder, id equals placeholder. So that's all it took to like create the landing spot for this chart. That if you want to call it that, basically it's the area where we're going to operate and add this chart. And so the next step is to figure out how this works. And I haven't used this yet, so basically we can go through it like this. We'll see if jQuery is loaded. So the first thing is we can do a simple command where we go alert, this is JavaScript, and jQuery has a little function where you can basically tell it to give you the ID, or I'm sorry, the version number. So alert, oops, I misspelled it, will cause a pop-up to happen when I load this page if this custom JS file is loaded and if this init method is being called somewhere. So let's see if it is by reloading the page. And no, it's not. So it's not actually being called at this point. Now I bet you if we ran back here to app.js, which was the other one we were looking at, which we saw called on the actual page, oops, you can see there's a ton of stuff actually called here. And there is my first time looking through this, so you'll have to forgive me. There's the initialization function. So you can actually see it is calling all this stuff here. So I bet you, we're not going to leave this in there, but I'll bet you if I added that over here, we would see it on this page. Boom, there it is. Now why? How did I know that? Going back to our layout file, when I went to the end, remember we have this jQuery wrapper script here. You can see they're loading up the app.js file, and it calls app init. So we could also go like this, and that would call our custom. So in this case, I don't want to edit this file, so I'm just going to get Command Z until it's back to normal, save it, and close it. Here's custom. Again, I have that alert in here under the init method, so this should fire. So I'm going to go back and check it out. Let's reload now. Now remember I got rid of it out of the app file. Now we just have this custom JS being used, and in here I added custom. And how did I know to use the capital custom? Because that is this right here. Now I'm not sure if this file is actually being loaded custom.js anywhere, so we'd have to make sure that that was actually loaded as well. So we can do that simply by first we'll test it, then I'll add it if it isn't. So reloading, nothing's happening. Custom.js is not being loaded. So how do we do that? Simply add in another one of these, rename it the file we want, which is custom.js, and now custom is added in there. And if we refresh, there it is. So now custom is being called. And we can use it. Great. Okay, how do we add this stinking chart? Now that we've got custom.js added to our file, we can go through and we can add different things. So if we want to initialize this, we can simply do something similar to what they're doing for the app.js. So let's see how they do it over here. So let's find our init again. There's our init function, and you can see that it's calling function names. You know they're functions because they have this. So I bet you if I found, let's look for handle fancy box. We'll find that function. Oops. Sorry, it's probably a method actually. Init fancy box, handle fancy box. There it is. So this is another way of defining a function. You set a variable equal to an anonymous function, and that's exactly what it does. So that's the way we're going to do it. We're basically going to create a variable named whatever we want to load our Flot chart, and then we'll use this pattern here. So let me show you how to do that. Come up here, we're going to do it under this function. We'll say load our Flot chart, and we'll call it var. And we'll say, let's see what's a good name for it. We'll say load Flot chart, and it equals a function, and we create a basic function just like that. Now these guys aren't doing it, but technically you should have a semicolon after these. We'll follow their lead this time. Okay, so here's our Flot chart. Now remember, first thing we need to do, if we go back to our Flot example, to call this thing is to basically make this call. Okay, so first we have to get our placeholder. So remember that we did that through jQuery by identifying the, and they're using double quotes, so I will too, hashtag. So placeholder was the ID we gave it, and that will give us the jQuery object. For debugging, I'm going to show you a little tip here. You can go console.log and anything you put in here, it'll output to the JavaScript console in your browser. So in this case, I want to see what I'm getting in placeholder from doing this jQuery selector.